Good morning. If you're not encouraged by being here today, I don't know what would encourage you. I'm so happy to be here. I hope you are as well. What a joy it was to participate in the Pew Packers this morning. I had 2 pews filled with children. That just brings a smile to my face. I want to say once again, if you are a guest in our presence, we ask that you fill out a card from the pew in front of you so that we can have a record of your attendance. Place that card in the collection plate as it is passed. That is your offering for today. We're so glad that you're here with us. This morning in our Bible class, we continued our series in preaching and ministry. And we did so by looking at the first part of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount that begins in chapter 5 of Matthew and continues through chapter 7. And that first part of the sermon is called the Beatitudes. And as we talked about those Beatitudes and described briefly what they meant, I was reminded of my studies this week in thinking especially about a good friend of mine. See, I think it's important that as we continue in this series and as we recognize that as Christians we are responsible for preaching and for ministry, not necessarily in a pulpit, not necessarily behind a podium, but in our everyday life, sharing the good news with others, it's important for us to realize that that includes not only the things we say, but also the things that we do. And so as we were talking about the Beatitudes, and as I've been looking at these Beatitudes this week, I kept coming back to this friend of mine. Because the life that he lives is a walking sermon. And the things that he does, to me, illustrate so much of what we see in the Bible, including what we call the Beatitudes. And so this morning I want to do something a little bit different. I want to tell you about this friend of mine and some of the things that he does that illustrate for me, by his actions, the Beatitudes that Jesus offers in Matthew 5. And so as I begin to tell you about this friend of mine, I want to say that, first of all, he comes from a very prominent family. His father has a very magnificent mansion. He has great authority and wealth, and he's very well respected for his wisdom. And my friend had the opportunity to continue in the family business and share in all of that. But instead, he chose to leave his family home because he felt like he would be able to help other people more away from home than if he had stayed at home. As I think about a decision like that and what it requires to leave behind wealth and comfort and prestige, you have to be thinking about someone other than yourself to make a decision like that. You have to be putting others first. And I think that fulfills very much of what Jesus has to say in Matthew 5 and verse 3. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Now, we talked in the Bible class about that meaning that we recognize our sin, but all of that comes back to the idea of humility. To put others before self, or to say, yes, I am a sinner. You have to be poor in spirit. You have to be humble. Jesus says, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. When I think about being poor in spirit, I think about my friend who left behind wealth and prestige to serve other people. He comes from a very wealthy, powerful family and background, and yet in his life he has known quite a bit of tragedy. He's dealt with quite a bit of difficulty, and he's faced a number of challenges as he has sought to help other people. When he made the decision to go and help other people, he was faced with resistance from even within his own family. And as he began his goodwill mission, if you want to call it that, he went first into his own hometown and he tried to help the people there but many of them could not see past his background. They remembered him growing up. They knew his mother and his father and his siblings, and they couldn't see past that. And so many of them would not accept his help. I remember on one occasion, he went to a very large city nearby because he knew that he could do a lot of good in that city. And he was able, as he first got there, to help a number of people, but very soon, those who were in authority began to realize how much attention he was getting, and they didn't like that very much. So they began to try to stop him from doing good. They began to try to kick him out of town. And so even though he was able to do quite a bit of good in that city, on the whole, he was not really accepted there. And as he continued through his path of trying to do good, he was met with more and more opposition, so that even those who had been part of his team in the beginning decided along the way they just couldn't handle the pressure. They couldn't handle all of the opposition. And I know that hurt him. I know that he understood how much he had sacrificed just to help someone else, and yet he was not accepted. So when I read what Jesus says in Matthew 5:4, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted," I'm reminded of the challenges that my friend faced in trying to do good. My friend is probably the strongest person I've ever known. He has an incredible way of facing difficulty, of dealing with trials without giving up. And in all of the things that he's faced, all of the challenges that he's had in trying to do good, I know that it would have been easy for him to say, "I've got a comfortable place at home with my wealthy father, and I'm just going to give up." But often, instead of looking back, he turned the other cheek when faced with opposition, when faced with ridicule for doing good. I think it takes a lot of strength to just take it. There were times when he was falsely accused that he could have gotten those in trouble who accused him, but instead he chose not to do that. In fact, more often than not, he simply just let it roll, unless you messed with those he was trying to help. He would not stand for that. He stood up very boldly in many occasions for those that he tried to help. But above all else, I can see the strength of my friend in the fact that he understands that some battles are best won by surrender. And so when Jesus says, "Blessed are the meek," we said in the Bible class, that's strength under control. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. I think about my friend. Did I mention that this friend of mine is a man of great faith? He left behind wealth to serve other people because he believes in God above all else. He took a life of simplicity because he wanted to serve God and others. And even though he has a background of great wealth, he is content often with very little, even willing to sacrifice so much that at times he has no place to call home, but he does that because he knows it's the best way to reach and serve others. He's one of those people who is able somehow to always do what is right. And so I have no doubt that he is the beneficiary of this blessing. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. With all that he's faced, all the difficult things that he's had to deal with in simply trying to do good, you would think that he might have become embittered. Knowing what he sacrificed just to help other people, and yet meeting with resistance time and time again, he might have become jaded. He might have held grudges, but that's just not the kind of person that he is. His default position is to forgive others. There were times when, if he had wanted, he could have taken vengeance upon people who treated him unfairly, but he chose instead to leave that up to the proper authority. In fact, he's the kind of person who is so forgiving that I'm comfortable saying he has forgiven more people than all of us combined. He takes to heart these words very much. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. I'm certain that my friend has never had an evil thought in his mind. Have you ever known a person who carried themselves so well, whose demeanor was so kind and polite that you could not imagine them even thinking something negative about someone else? That's the kind of person that he is. He just has a good heart. He left behind wealth and riches to serve other people, and he didn't do it so he could get famous. In fact, he's had opportunities to accept fame and riches, and he's rejected them. He left behind all of these things so that he could help other people, and his motives have been pure all along the way. He's really a kind of a private person. He likes to spend time alone. He doesn't want to be in the limelight. And those that he has helped, he encourages to follow his example of quietly helping others. Because it's not about being seen. His motivation is always pure. And I can't say without a doubt by looking at someone's actions what their motivations are. But if his actions are any sign of the status of his heart, then I've no doubt that he falls right in with what Jesus has to say in Matthew 5:8. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. My good friend understands better than anyone that all people are equally valuable. With all of the things that he's faced, with those who have constantly fought against his desire to do good, it might have been easy for him to play favorites, but he doesn't do that. He has helped everyone. In his desire to do good, he has helped the poor, and he has gone to the rich. He has worked with the young and with the old. I remember on one occasion he was in a place where there was quite a bit of racial tension, and he challenged those who were present very strongly to overcome their prejudices. And through the work that he has done, my friend has been able to unite people from all different backgrounds and lifestyles. He has been able to create unity and harmony among people in a very special way. He is truly a peacemaker. Jesus says in Matthew 5:9, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God." This is maybe the hardest thing that I have to tell you about my friend. He has done so much good for other people. But he understood that some things are more valuable than others. He recognized that in spite of all the good that he was doing, there was something greater that he could do. And that was ultimately to die for his cause. And though some among his supporters tried to resist this, he willingly surrendered himself to his enemies. And when they took him to court, they brought witnesses against him who said things that just weren't true. But he refused to defend himself. So eventually he was convicted and he was executed. And so I have no doubt that when Jesus says, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven," that this friend of mine knows the full meaning of this blessing. Now, maybe some of you, as we have gone through this brief outline of my friend's life, have come to realize that you know this friend of mine. His name is not Gandhi or Martin Luther King Jr. His name is Jesus. He was a powerful preacher. His preaching was accompanied by signs. He was able to take whatever was in the setting where he was preaching and use that as an illustration to teach those who were present. But his preaching was also powerful because it was supported by the life that he lived. As we continue through this series on preaching and ministry, and we recognize that as Christians, every one of us is responsible for participating in our own way in preaching and ministry, we're probably hung up on how do I say what I need to say in the right moment. And it's important that we do tell good news. News must be told. It cannot simply be lived. But if we are not living the gospel, then the words will ring hollow. If we are not living a life that has been transformed by Jesus Christ, when we come to others and we say, "Look at what God has done for me," what will they see in our lives? Jesus taught us not only by the recorded sermons that we're going to look at in this series, but also by the record of his life, that it is important that you practice what you preach. And he certainly did practice what he preached. And thank God for that. Perhaps you need to respond to the Lord this morning. Perhaps your life has not yet been transformed by Jesus Christ, and you understand that you need the blood of Christ to cover your sins. You can come believing that Jesus is the Christ. Set your mind upon God, turning away from sin. Confess Christ and be buried in the waters of baptism, having your sins washed away. You rise to walk a new life, a new creature in Jesus Christ. Or maybe you're already a Christian and you haven't been practicing what you're supposed to be preaching, and you need to come back to the Lord. Maybe you're a Christian and you simply need the prayers and encouragement of this church body. Whatever your need may be this morning, the Lord invites you to come as we stand and sing together.